What's going on, everybody? This is Dean with Blue Ridge Overland Gear, and today we're going to go over some basic installation tips for installing one of these mobile style radios into your Overland vehicle. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what's in the box, what's not in the box, is there anything else you need to get. Then we're going to look at power and wiring and some common mistakes a lot of people make and some pro tips that I have to help make your radio perform a little bit better. Then we'll talk a little bit about mounting antennas. And then lastly, we will wrap up with some other basic tips. So here we go. So I'm going to be going over what's in the box of the Midland radios that we sell, but these installation tips will apply to any mobile radio that you are installing into your vehicle. Same with antennas. So a lot of these tips will work for GMRS radios as well as ham radios, those sorts of things. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the handheld radios, and the nice thing about these is everything that you need is in this box. So this right here is the FRS radio set, has two handhelds. Inside is also the charger, all of the cables and stuff that you need. And rather than unbox this one, I will show you what I have with my handhelds. I actually have my two GMRS handhelds, so same deal as the FRS. Comes with two handheld radios. It also comes with a dual radio charger, a 120 volt wall charger. It also comes with a 12 volt charger that you can plug into your cigarette lighter. So this kit is the same whether it's FRS or GMRS. So the radios already have rechargeable batteries in them, and you get the 12 volt charger or a wall charger, meaning you can actually just plug them into the cigarette lighter of the vehicle while you're out camping. Also, the FRS radios are USB rechargeable, so you can actually leave the charger at home if you want to. But the GMRS radios are not USB chargeable at this time. Now, when it comes to mobile radios, the first one we're going to talk about is the MXT115, which is a 15 watt mobile radio. The first thing you get when you do the unboxing is the radio itself. Now, the mounting bracket's already attached to it, and this mounting bracket is positionable. Right now, I have it set up so where you can mount it on top of your dash, but the same bracket can actually be flipped over if you want to mount it underneath your dash. Hand mic is also included. It uses an RJ45 style plug that plugs into the front of the radio, so you can detach it whenever you're not using the radio, which is also a nice feature. Inside this bag is the magnetic mount antenna. This is a little guy, but it is functional. It does work well. And basically the wire is already coiled up in here, and you just screw that into the back of your radio. You can position the antenna out on your hood or on the roof of the vehicle, and it'll get the job done. And of course, lastly, you have your power wire. Now, this wire can be plugged directly into the cigarette lighter. For those of you that are non-committal, you can just plug this in when you need it, take the radio out when you don't, or you can use the same wire and splice it in directly, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Now, the sister radio to the 115 is the 275. It is another 15 watt radio. Now, the main difference in that is it is a remote mount, meaning all of the controls for that radio are in the handset, meaning you can put the brain of the radio in a glove box up under the dash somewhere out of the way, so it can get a little bit of a cleaner install if that's the type of radio you're looking for. But like the 115, it comes with everything you need: power wire, antenna, and the hand mic is just a little bit of a different style with the buttons on the mic itself. All right, so next up, we'll take a look at the MXT400, which is the 40 watt big brother to the 115. So in the box is gonna be the main radio itself. The mounting bracket is hidden on the bottom of the cardboard here. You also have the hand mic and of course the power cable. Now, one thing that's a little bit different on the MXT400 compared to the 115 is the fact that this power cable is designed to be hardwired in. There's no cigarette plug to it. That's just because the amperage draw of this radio is a little bit higher, and also for better performance, you're going to want to direct wire it. We'll kind of go over a little bit more why in a little bit. So the one thing that's not in the box is an antenna, and that's because you got a couple different options when it comes to GMRS antennas with Midland. The first one is going to be this one here. This is the plus 6 dB gain whip antenna. There is also a plus 3 dB ghost antenna, just depending on if you want, a long range, high, tall antenna or a light, short, stubby antenna, depending on your mounting options. As far as which one is better, they're kind of both going to perform about the same way. It just depends on how you're going to mount it. If you have a roof rack and a rooftop tent and some lights and you don't want a long antenna sticking high up, the ghost antenna is going to be perfect for that. If you're mounting the antenna a little bit lower, say on the hood or the bumper, or on a vehicle like my Jeep here, if you're going to be putting it on the back brake light, the whip antenna is going to give you a little bit more of a higher range to capture that signal. Now, one of the advantages with these antennas is you can actually switch back and forth between them. I know a couple people that actually have both antennas, and when they're driving around town or they're talking to somebody close to them, they'll be running the ghost antenna just because it's lower profile, it's not bouncing off tree branches, that sort of thing. But if they end up in an area where they want a little bit more range or a little bit better performance, they just unscrew it and then they screw on the whip antenna, and that gives them just that little bit better performance. Now, when it comes time to mount your antenna, you have a couple different options. Like I said, with the 115, that comes with its own magnetic mount antenna, meaning you just basically pull it out, slap it on the roof or the hood, and you're good to go. When you get into the whip antenna or the ghost antenna, you need some sort of mount for that. Now, the one that we offer is the universal lip mount, which allows you to mount that to a trunk or a vehicle hood. The last mount that I'll mention is the universal magnetic mount antenna. This allows you to use something like the whip antenna or the ghost antenna in a magnetic mount configuration. And it comes with just a little magnet on the bottom. You can slap it to your hood or your roof. If you have something like a Jeep with a fiberglass hardtop, they actually sell a little metal disc that you can epoxy onto the hardtop, and then you can mount the magnetic mount antenna to that. As far as brackets go, there are also some universal brackets that can bolt to things like roof racks or tire carriers or other parts of your vehicle like bumpers and those sorts of things. Now, if you're looking for a little bit more of a custom install, there are a variety of different custom brackets on the market. I have an example here, which is the one that's going to be for my Jeep. This one actually goes right behind the brake light on the driver's side. So it's got the 3 screws here for the brake light, and then it's got a hole here for mounting the antenna. Now, if you do some sort of bracket like this, one of the things that you want to make sure of is that the paint is actually rubbed away so that you have metal. One of the things we're going to talk about here in a little bit is signal quality and signal strength, and for that you need a really good ground. So when you look at a bracket, yes, the powder coat is really nice, but you want to make sure that the paint is wore off where it's going to be contacting the vehicle, usually around the screws, just to make sure that that antenna is going to be able to ground to the vehicle. One of the other things that you might need is some sort of adapter. Now, this little guy right here is what's known as an NMO adapter. And what this does is this allows you to screw the antenna on. And when you have a bracket, a little adapter goes through the hole on the bracket and allows you to mount your antenna. And then it uses the same style coax cable to go from the antenna to your vehicle. Now, these come in a variety of different configurations, lengths, sizes. You can also get them with a 90-degree bend, depending on the type of installation you're gonna go to. This one actually cost me about $8, and I found it on Amazon.com. And the only downside I found is that sometimes the brackets you buy, the holes aren't always the right size. So I actually have to kind of drill this out a little bit to make it work. And one last thing I will mention is a lot of these little adapters for antennas come with one of these spiraled washers that has teeth in them. And you want to make sure you use that and that it cuts into the paint, because again, that's going to give you a really good ground for your antenna and help it perform better. All right, so you've picked your radio, you've picked your antenna. Now it's time to get to the installation. Now, I will tell you flat out, anybody who comes to me with any sort of radio performance problems, I always check the power and the ground first. So that's going to be my very first pro tip for you guys. When you go to install your radio, you want to make sure you have both clean power and a very good ground. And what I mean by that is when you look at your radio, it's going to have a plug on the back. There's going to be an inline fuse. And then on the MXT400s, it comes with this, pre-terminated wire with a plug on the back. And then it comes down and it's got 2 fuses on it for the power and the ground. And then it's just got kind of the bare wire, meaning you can wire this in directly to a power source under your dash, which I don't recommend, or you run it all the way to the battery, which is what I do recommend. And that's also why these power cables are pretty long. It gives you enough room to go through the firewall and up to the battery, giving you a very good ground direct to the battery and a very good clean power source direct to the battery. Now, the radios do have their own power switch, so you can power this off, power this on, even though it's directly wired to the battery. Now, some people do like to have it wired to the ignition so they don't accidentally leave the radio running all of the time. And that's where things are going to get a little bit more complicated, and that's why I have the easel over here, is because I'm going to give you kind of a basic rundown of how you can wire the radio in a couple different configurations. Now you might be wondering why I said you want to go directly to the battery. The reason being is that's going to be a very clean power source. Modern vehicles have a lot of electrical components in them. You have your car stereo with all of its speakers. Maybe you have a subwoofer. You also have all the HVAC controls for your air conditioning and your heat. And also modern vehicles have a lot of lights on the dash, in the dash, under the seats, in the doors, in the ceiling, everywhere. And LEDs love to interfere with radios. Ham radio and GMRS radio are super susceptible to LEDs because those LEDs actually have a little bit of an electrical hum to them. And if you tap in with your power to something under the dash, chances are there's going to be a little bit of electrical interference because the auto manufacturer has taken all of those wires and bundled them together, and you get this effect which is called induction, where current through one wire will actually induce current in a neighboring wire, and that can cause some interference. Perfect example of this, I had a buddy of mine and his radio would never work when his headlights were on. If he was driving around during the day, his radio would be fine. The moment it got dark and he turned his headlights on, the performance of his radio dropped. He couldn't transmit very well, he couldn't hear very well, and that was because he had actually tapped his power wire in to the same power wire for his headlights. Yeah, don't do that. Another friend of mine was having issues where he was plugging his radio into the cigarette lighter to run a handheld radio, which you would think would be fine. The problem is his vehicle had LEDs in the dash, and ham radios and GMRS handhelds do not like the interference from those LEDs, and it was just enough interference for him to really have very poor performance out of his radio. So it's just kind of one of those things that you want to consider. Clean power and a very clean ground is very important. Also, speaking of power and ground, we drive off-road vehicles as overland enthusiasts, and our vehicles are very susceptible to vibration. So even if you take all the care in the world to make sure you have a good solid power and a good solid ground, you want to check those periodically, just because as you're going down the road and you're going over washboards or you're bouncing off rocks or going down even just a dirt road, all of those little micro vibrations can loosen bolts and can actually cause your ground or power to become intermittent, which again can interfere with the performance of your radio. All right, so let's talk some specifics about wiring and some of the different options you have. Now, I already mentioned that most of the time what you're going to end up doing is you're just going to wire this thing direct to the battery. The wires are going to be long enough to kind of snake your way through the dash, through the firewall, up under the hood to your battery, and you've got a power positive and a ground negative, which is fine. The downside to this is that means your radio is on all the time. So let me quick draw a little diagram for you. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to have our battery, and our battery has a ground and then our positive lead, and that's going to go all the way out here to our radio, which again is going to have a positive and a ground. Now this is what's known as battery hot, meaning that that radio has power 100% of the time. Your ignition can be off, your key can be out of the vehicle, and at any time you can hit the power button on the radio, turn it on, and use it. The downside is if you have it hot all the time and you accidentally leave your radio on, it could slowly drain your battery over time, just like if you accidentally left your headlights on. Now, to prevent this parasitic battery drain, one of the things that you can do is install a switch between your power source and your radio. Now, what a lot of people will do is they'll be tempted to just put it right in line. So they'll do something like this. They'll have their battery, which has its ground, the radio with its ground. All right, and they'll put their switch in that main power wire. Now, this is a no-no. You don't want to do this, okay? The reason being is those radios will draw a lot of amperage, a lot of current, and those switches usually aren't rated for that, and you'll actually cause a meltdown in the switch. The vast majority of vehicle fires in four-wheel drives and overland vehicles is electrical, and it's from people trying to do stuff like this. So what you want to do is you actually want to use a relay. Now, a relay is nothing super special. It's about an inch by inch by inch. It's got a couple prongs on the bottom. And what this relay allows you to do is it allows you to run that power from the battery to whatever device you're wanting to run. So it could be lights, could be an auxiliary power socket, or something like a radio. And then you can run a trigger wire for your switch. So what that would look like is something like this. All right, we've got our battery. It's got its ground. Then we got power, and then we're gonna have our relay, and then that is gonna come down to our radio, which has its ground. And then coming off the relay is where we're gonna have the switch, and that is gonna come back up here to the battery. Now, the nice thing is when you run a switch circuit, the switch circuit doesn't draw a whole lot of power. It's just basically just enough to tell that relay whether to engage or not. So you can run this off of almost anything. So if you're gonna tap into your vehicle's wiring harness for the switch, you can do that. And then what that allows you to do is have that dedicated power line to your radio, but it's running through a relay which isolates it. And then you have that ability to do a kill switch. So now, in terms of perspective, your relay, you're gonna want as close to the battery as possible. So a lot of times if you look under your hood and look near your battery, that's where your fuse box and all the relays for your normal vehicle automotive stuff is. That's kind of where you're gonna wanna put the relay for something like your radio. So now the alternative to battery hot is ignition hot. And this is where things can get just a little bit complicated, but bear with me and I'll try and draw this out real quick. So you've got our battery here. It's got its ground, okay? Now, here's where we're gonna use a relay. So we'll have our relay here. And then we will have our radio. So right now we have our battery, we have our relay, and we have our radio. Now, with the kill switch before, we ran the kill switch directly to the battery. And that meant if you wanted to turn the radio on, even while the vehicle's not running, all you had to do was flip that switch. An alternative is to actually run that relay off of your ignition circuit, meaning that the relay will only be triggered when you actually have the key, all right, turning the ignition. Now, here's the question. Where do you find an ignition hot circuit? In most vehicles, you have your auxiliary 12-volt socket. That's your cigarette lighter. That is actually ignition hot. And the main reason for that is if you accidentally push it in, it doesn't cause a meltdown in your dash. So that thing is only going to be on when your ignition is on. That is probably the go-to circuit that a lot of people tap into. And again, since you're going to be running a relay, which is a low current draw thing, you really don't need to worry about this circuit kind of causing any types of problems. However, I will say you do want to make sure you have a fuse somewhere between the cigarette lighter and the relay, just to, again, prevent a short circuit or anything like that. But what this will mean is that the radio will only be on when your vehicle key ignition is turned either to the accessory or in the run position. So this is our ignition hot circuit. So to recap, you have your battery. That is connected to a relay, which is connected to your radio. The radio has its ground. And then the relay is connected to an ignition hot circuit. The go-to one a lot of people will use is the cigarette lighter adapter. And of course, that is already pre-wired into your vehicle's ignition system. And the biggest advantage with this is the radio will only be on while the vehicle's running, while that key is turned. And if your vehicle is off, there's no way for that radio to have any sort of parasitic draw and kill your battery. Now, this does require a little bit of wiring knowledge and some skill set. However, there are some other commercially available options out there. And if you have a modern vehicle, like say something like a new Jeep Wrangler, you can get those with an optional 4 circuits built into the dash already. Other vehicles like the Ford Raptor and I believe the Toyota TRD Pro already has some switch circuits available. So you can actually bypass all of this and just tap into one of those circuits, or you can install some sort of electrical management system like an S-Pod, which we'll look at here in a second. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple other options that are kind of commercially available things that can make life a little bit easier. And also this applies not just to hooking up your radio, but if you're going to be running other accessories, things like lights or other 12-volt accessories, charging sockets, other stereo stuff, or even 12-volt fridges, you start getting into a little bit more complex, and the last thing you want is kind of this spider web of wires running everywhere in your vehicle on top of the current spider web of wire that the OE manufacturer put in. So again, we'll kind of start here at our battery, okay? And the battery is grounded. And over here, we'll have our radio, and that needs power and that needs a ground. And just for giggles, we'll put in a light, and we'll do another light here that both need power and a ground. So right now we've got 3 devices that we want to run power to. Now, in theory, you could just run power to each one of these things, and you kind of end up with some spaghettification going on under your hood. That's your $10 word for the day, by the way, spaghettification. There are some commercially available kits out there. Painless Performance is one of them. They offer some very simple relay fuse configuration things that have kind of a switch circuit already pre-wired into it, and all you need to do is basically connect to the battery. The switch goes in your dash, and then you connect to whatever device you're powering, and it's good to go. As long as the current for that piece is rated for something like your radio, which most of them will be, you're going to be fine. When you start getting into multiple circuits though, instead of running 3 individual things or more, that's where you can look into some sort of power management system, and probably the go-to one for me is something like an S-Pod. So we'll put that here, all right? So now the advantage of an S-Pod is that it is a multi-circuit power management system, meaning you only have to connect it to the battery, okay? So that gets connected to the battery, and it'll also have its own ground, which we're just gonna put right there. And then the advantage is this thing has multiple circuits, so all you have to do is connect each one of these devices to the S-Pod, and then the S-Pod has a dedicated thing that comes out to the switches that are mounted in your dash. There's a couple different options, couple different configurations. I'm not gonna go into super detail on that. But the advantage is this gives you that ability to run something like a kill switch to prevent the parasitic draw from your battery, because the S-Pod has a built-in voltage meter, and when it detects a voltage drop to a certain point, it kills everything that's plugged into it. So if you accidentally leave your fog lights on, or you accidentally leave your light bar on, or you accidentally leave your radio on, it's not actually going to kill your battery. And the nice thing is this is a very nice clean install. All of it's pre-terminated, and it's super nice. That said, there are a lot of other products out there on the market, and we're actually going to kind of create a little menu over here off to the side, and we'll kind of list some of those different options. I just don't want to go into all of them right now. Now, the DIY alternative to an S-Pod is using what's called a relay block. And a couple things that you want to do is when you're searching is you want to use the words relay block, because that'll actually use either these style larger relays or some of the smaller ones. There's another series of relays that are about half of this size. And you can actually get them in a waterproof container. So that's going to be the next keyword. So again, you're looking for a relay block and one that is weather tight or weather resistant. So you might be wondering why you might want to go through all the trouble to install something like an S-Pod or some sort of relay block. And the reason being is you want to make sure that your installation is kind of nice and tidy. And the big reason for that is you want to make sure it's field serviceable. There is nothing worse than being 1,000 miles away from home and your radio not working because there's a loose wire or a bad ground, or maybe a wire's been cut or something like that. So you want to make sure that your installation is clean. Sometimes it's tempting to like bury the wires out of sight, out of mind, put them in wire loom, zip tie them to other wires and stuff that are going throughout your vehicle. But that can cause a couple problems. The first one is tracing. Can you actually follow the wire from your radio all the way out to the battery to make sure there aren't any problems? Make sure the inline fuse is still good. If you're using a relay, make sure the relay is good. If the relay is bad, can you actually get to that relay to remove it and replace it, test it, maybe swap it out with another one? Also, you want to make sure that you're not causing induction. Again, if you're running current through this, or maybe you have an onboard air compressor or a 12-volt fridge, and you've got all of those power wires bundled together, that can actually cause interference with your radio and static. Same thing with your antenna. You don't want to route your antenna wire with your power wires or your ground wires, because again, you'll cause some interference with your signal. So you want to make sure you're doing that. And the other thing too is you want to make sure you actually have some of the parts you need to service it. If you're using a relay, carry an extra relay. If you have fuses in line, you want to make sure you have extra fuses. Personally, I would probably actually replace this style fuse with a standard blade style fuse, because I have a ton of those in my electrical kit. I don't actually have any of this style. Now, the last little pro tip that I'm going to give you involves a magnet. Sometimes, no matter what you've done, no matter how you've run your wires, no matter what circuits you've tapped into, sometimes you can still get a little bit of interference. And sadly, the culprit of that is your vehicle's alternator, of all things. Sometimes you just get a little bit of alternator whine, and you can kind of detect that, whereas if you hit the gas and your vehicle starts accelerating, your RPMs go up, that whine gets a little bit louder and then goes away. Or again, maybe you're getting a little bit of interference from an existing circuit in your vehicle, whether it's HVAC or your car's stereo itself or an LED circuit. You can actually get these little magnetic clips that will go around the power wire, and this just helps filter out any noise that's being transmitted through that power into your radio. So thank you for watching this short little video on installation tips for mobile radios. Like I said, my name is Dean. This is Blue Ridge Overland Gear. If you've enjoyed this video, please give this a thumbs up. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button. We do a lot of videos like this on a variety of different topics. And as always, if you have any questions, drop them down in the comments below. We do our best to answer every question that somebody's asked. So again, thanks for coming and hanging out. Hopefully you learned something.